Major funding for this program has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding has been provided by the Mississippi Humanities Council and others. A complete list is available from PBS.
I love the South. I can't imagine living anywhere besides the South. We believe in our Jewish heritage for sure, but I think that there's no one who was born in this area who doesn't feel a real kinship to the South and to the history of the South. Right or wrong, we are and we're a part of it.
People from the east, the larger metropolitan areas, are shocked to know first that there are any Jews in Mississippi. And I suppose second, equally surprised to know that we like living here.
Well, I am proud to be from the South for many reasons, but I also have always felt like I was one beat away from the heart of the South. There's a lot of graciousness about the South that you don't get someplace else, but there's always been a feeling that I didn't quite belong.
We knew that there was something different about them. You didn't really expect them to do the same types of things that you'd expect a white person to do. And I guess in our mind, we divided the two. There were white people in Glen Allen, and there were Jewish people in Glen Allen. They may have thought they were white, but we never did.
Two and a half million Jews immigrated to the United States during the 19th and early 20th century. They came first from Germany and Central Europe, later in greater numbers from Eastern Europe and Russia. Many left countries their families had been in for centuries, but where they lived as second-class citizens, victims of religious discrimination, social isolation, and mob violence. In the U.S., most Jewish immigrants settled together in northern cities teeming with immigrants. Conditions were poor, but the newcomers drew strength from one another, finding comfort in the familiar sights and smells and sounds of the old country. Others would seek the promise of America in a place as far from that world as they could possibly imagine.
Well, my father came to this country in the early 20th century. He was 12 years old. He was the first of his immediate family to come to this country. He had an uncle in Ruleville. He came by himself. I remember him, he often told this story. He had a tag around his neck that had the address where he was to go. but spoke no English, and somehow he managed in that way to get from Eastern Europe to Ruleville, Mississippi, through the port of New York.
Spreading out along the Mississippi from Memphis to Vicksburg, the Mississippi Delta has been called the most southern place on earth. At the end of the 19th century, it was a land of expansive cotton plantations. Blacks made up the vast majority of the Delta's population, but it was the white minority, a self-styled aristocracy of wealthy planters, who maintained total control of the social, economic, and political life of the region.
The Delta has been aptly described at the time and now as the South's South. It was as close to being the paradigm for virtually all of the old Southern culture and all the old Southern pathologies and all the old Southern virtues. The rigidity in the Delta was not to be exceeded by any other place. It was a place in which virtually any kind of excess when it came to the way blacks were treated was tolerated if it was done in the defense of what we used to call our way of life.
In a culture where racial roles were strictly defined, Jews would occupy a place somewhere between black and white. The first to arrive in the Delta came as peddlers. Traveling the Delta's dirt roads, they sold household goods to plantation owners and tenant farmers, bridging a gap between disparate worlds.
They were in a rather unique position. They had both the ear of the black community and the ear of the white community because they were mobile and they went to wherever the needs were and whomever had the money to pay them.
As the Delta's population exploded, farm towns popped up throughout the region and the immigrant peddlers set up shop. A Russian immigrant named Morris Grundfest settled in Cary, Mississippi at the turn of the century, opening a general merchandise store.
In the general store, they sold everything, from groceries to dry goods. Before Social Security, they sold the caskets to bury you in. Nails, shoes for the horses, shoes for the children. If they didn't have it, it'd be in on the next truck.
Grundfest bought 220 acres of nearby farmland and established himself as a cotton planter. Today, Ben and Betty Lee Lamensdorf operate 3 Delta plantations, including the original plot purchased by Morris Grundfest, Betty Lee's grandfather.
People are surprised that you're Jewish and a farmer, but gee, we were farming a long time ago in Israel, and we just went from sheep herders to raising cotton. My grandfather farmed, my father farmed. That's the only thing I've ever wanted to do was farm, and so I started farming. My wife and I, we have been farming for over 38 years here on this land. Cotton has been good to the Jewish people that came to the Mississippi Delta.
While farming was a sideline for some of the Delta's Jews, their main occupation would always be shopkeeping, and Jewish stores became a staple of even the smallest country town. The Jewish merchants catered to black and white customers and operated largely on credit, an essential part of a farm economy where cash was not available throughout the year.
This is the picture of what this store looked like then. And this is I right there with that big white bow in my head. Practically all the stores looked like this. There was always something hanging up at the top, and usually socks and handkerchiefs and things like that hanging from the ceiling, where you could just reach up and pull one down.
And these little towns were booming with a lot of Jewish merchants. You could go up and down the street of all of these towns, and every store basically were owned by Jews here. They sent for other members of the family because they said, hey, we're doing well here in Louisville, Mississippi, or whichever town it might be. So they sent for other family members overseas and said, come on.
This street on Saturday night, when I was growing up, you couldn't drive like we're driving now till 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning because the street would be packed with people. The Mississippi Delta was an agricultural-based economy, and the field hands and farmers all paid off on Saturday, paid their field hands off.
So you would have a small town like Glen Allen almost double its size on Saturday because so many people would come in from the surrounding plantations and farms. They would come to buy food. They would come to see their family and friends. They would come to go to the movies.
In Clarksdale, Mississippi, Issaquena Street was the heart of the black community.
You couldn't walk this street this time morning. There was so many people here. This time of the year was harvesting time. And people was working. Christmas was coming up. Everybody got their settlements. It was just a different place. And the Jews was here with all the merchandise basically that you needed. Beyond the track there, under the track, it was like white folks' town over there. And you went over there to buy stuff in and out, but the deals was basically kept over here as far as us and the Jews, because the Jews in those days had a relationship with the blacks way beyond what they have today.
The Jewish people were not unlike the white people of Glen Allen, but in many regards, they lived their lives a little bit beyond what was expected. And I remember one lady in particular, Mrs. Freed, and she had a son, Milton, who ran the Freed hardware store in Glen Allen. And there was something about them that they did things that were just a little bit out of the ordinary. They did not make heroic stands, but they certainly did some things that were going against the grain. I remember when a black lady worked in the store as a clerk, and that was something that was not really done. Black people did not take money from white people, and they let this happen, whereas at that point, I'm not quite sure one of the white merchants would have gone that far.
Rules of social interaction were taken seriously in the Deep South. And Jews, if they wanted to stay and thrive, knew they would have to take on the manners and mores of their fellow white Southerners. They immersed themselves in the civic life of the region, becoming mayors, school board members, and Chamber of Commerce presidents in their Delta towns. And while the elite debutante balls and a few country clubs remained off limits, generations of Delta Jews grew up with a sense of almost complete acceptance.
I believe I've been discriminated more in my lifetime in my experiences because I'm from the South than because I'm Jewish. I'm not naive to think that no one has any anti-Semitism in their blood or in their head or whatever, but I've never felt it.
There was not a lot of anxiety when I was growing up for me or my family about we were different, we were Jews. And you were certainly considered acceptable. We did the right things, and we said the right things, and we acted just like everybody else did.
In the Delta and across the South, Jews faced the dual challenge of holding on to their Jewish identity as they became part of Southern society. Despite their small numbers, or possibly because of them, each generation has shown a deep resolve to keep Jewish life alive in the region. Today, small congregations have become smaller, but their commitment to their heritage and to one another remains.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
No longer able to afford a full-time rabbi, these congregation members in Vicksburg, Mississippi, take turns leading the weekly Friday night service.
Uvkayeh dekol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uvezman kariv v'emaru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mavarach la'allah ul-almei al-maya.
I think some of us come more since we don't have a rabbi. I didn't mean that because we didn't like the rabbi, but because whoever happens to be saying the service, we all try to support them.
We have been more conscious, as Marion said, of this is our group. This is the nucleus. These are the people that we've got to depend on if we're going to keep this a viable congregation at all. So we do make the extra effort to be here and to participate. It's a little bit more of an inner drive now than perhaps we had in the past.
With Jewish families scattered across the region, Delta cities have always been focal points for Jewish life. By the 1920s, there were synagogues and thriving congregations in 4 Delta towns. Greenwood, a cotton trading hub, was home to both an Orthodox and a Reformed Jewish congregation. Today, there are just 20 Jews left in Greenwood, and only the Orthodox synagogue remains.
This is the Havoth Ram Synagogue. It was built in 1923 at the cost of $35,000. The architect was a gentleman, Irish man by the name of Frank McGoy. He designed and built this.
Joe Erber's grandfather was a charter member of Greenwood's Orthodox congregation. These days, on Friday nights, the postal worker and part-time police officer chants the traditional Sabbath service for a core group of members.
I guess I came in here when I was 2, 3 years old, and I've got a lifetime in here. In fact, I was bar mitzvahed 40 years ago this month. 40 years ago this month. Right here, right where I'm standing. I've got a picture at home of my head coming up to right about here on the ark. We've tried to honor our forefathers, our ancestors. We're trying to do as many traditions as they did. We've never been perfect. We've never done what your Hasidim or Lubavitchers in New York or some of those people, we've done what best we can with what we've got. My mother was a very religious person. Being the granddaughter of a rabbi, before she died, I had to conduct services a couple of times up here because the gentleman who did was out of town. And when I stood up here, when you conduct services, you stand with your back to the congregation. I could almost feel her smile burning into my back that her son was able to get up here and do something like that. She was proud of it. Sometimes now when I conduct services, I can more or less feel my mother spirit watching over us or being with us and know she's happy about it.
For Jews in the Delta, it has always taken a special effort to maintain a sense of community. For years, they followed an active schedule of dances, youth group events, and holiday celebrations.
Before my parents, the Delta was just known as a party area, and they put us to shame. They had dances, and people from Clarksdale, Greenwood, Greenville, Vicksburg, they would get together once or twice a month for dances and so forth.
With fewer and fewer chances to socialize with other Jews, congregation members in Greenville began a new tradition, now the biggest annual gathering of the region's Jewish community, the Delta Jewish Open.
Probably when we first started there, they didn't probably know that we had enough Jewish golfers to have a tournament. And it's amazing, we started out with the 10 or 15 8 years ago, and we've come as high as 54, 56 golfers, and we have quite a number of real good players. So we have a lot of folks that can play good golf, and we have a lot of people that play bad golf, but they still enjoy it, and they keep coming back every year.
Okay, everybody, let's go.
I think it's terrific to get together for a social and a fun reason and not a funeral or something, you know, sad. And a lot of these people, in fact, most of them knew each other in high school or college. A number of them went to Ole Miss together or LSU. You know, it's just a great reunion for them. And some of them, if they haven't already moved to a big city, they were probably the only Jewish families left in their little town.
We've got a lot of new faces this year, and I hope everybody has met everybody, and we've got a lot of people that have been here every year.
Being from the Delta, you have to be from there to understand it. Other people say what town they're from, but when you're from the Delta, you say you're from the Delta. No matter where you go, you'll run into people. Well, you know so-and-so from, and everybody feels like they're all brothers and sisters, and it's just a great feeling.
For us, it's like a fourth generation, fifth generation way of life. And we grew up, and my parents grew up traveling somewhere to go to Sunday school or go to a temple. And you know you have to do it, and you just do it. Let me see. How about that? Maybe a little bigger than that. Growing up Jewish in the South, it's hard to explain to someone who is not from here and hasn't experienced it, because it's all mixed up and intertwined together. We are Jewish, but we're Southern. And sometimes we feel more comfortable with Southern Christians than we feel with Jews from another part of the country. But yet we have a very strong sense of Jewishness.
Passover was a big event. As long as my grandmother lived, we did everything that she did. And that was the thing of you brought out a complete different set of dishes and china, pots and pans, everything. We did all that for a long time. I don't do it anymore. I think over the years, the people who started out being very orthodox finally just relaxed what they did, and it got to be
but a few of the families did.
just a few families kept it. Most everybody just finally stopped doing something, and then something else, and just finally changed.
We met in Sunday school. And I don't remember exactly what grade. It was very...
Fifth grade.
Lan remembers.
I remember.
She always will remember. 5th grade, they started coming to Sunday school.
We were not boyfriend and girlfriend in 5th grade.
I just knew her, and that was it. I would discuss all my girlfriends with her, and she would give me
Advice.
great advice.
And I had never dated anybody Jewish, particularly except as a friend. I mean, and so I was very comfortable with, more comfortable probably with the non-Jewish, dating non-Jewish people than I was boys, and I was Jewish boys.
Page 21. See, Seth, we already skipped 21 pages. Now in the presence of loved ones and friends, before us the emblems of festive rejoicing. We gather for our sacred celebration with the household of Israel, our elders and young ones, linking and binding the past with the future.
Happy are those of steadfast faith who still can bless the light of candles shining in the darkness. Rejoice, O earth, in those who keep the way. I mean, I think that, as I said before, when you grow up in the Mississippi Delta and you're Jewish, you're Jewish, but yet you're not Jewish like if you grew up in another part of the country. And so he was a good old Mississippi Delta Jewish redneck. So he just seemed to suit me.
Right, it is customary to begin the meal with hard-boiled eggs flavored with salt water. So let us begin to eat. Let us eat.
The spring festival of Passover brings Jewish families together to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. Leanne and Alan's children are the 5th generation of their family to celebrate this holiday in Indianola, Mississippi.
I think we work harder at being Jewish in our area because it is more difficult than people who live in a city that just, it's easy for them because everybody around them is Jewish. And I think we have to work much harder to maintain our Jewishness here.
I grew up having prayers, a moment of prayer, every football game that I went to, Greenville, Mississippi. And I'm sure some of them were not as ecumenical as I would like to have them been. But I mean, it wasn't the end of the world. We didn't win or lose the football game based on whether we prayed to Jesus or not. And it didn't make me a better or lesser Jew because I sat there and heard it.
As a child growing up, I went to public schools. I learned the Lord's Prayer. I learned to sing Silent Night, and I don't think I had to learn Hail Mary because Catholic wasn't in any more than Jewish was in.
I was president of the MYF. That's the Methodist Youth Fellowship. And until the preacher thought my daddy wouldn't like it. And I went to Vacation Bible School, and I could sing Yes, Jesus Loves Me with the best of them. And I'm still glad this day. I know all that.
The South's not known as the Bible Belt for nothing. People, I think, probably take religion, or at least religious affiliation, more seriously here than in many other areas. And so I think it's probably reassuring to the non-Jewish population to see that, well, these Jews have built a church, as some of them call it, and they go to services, maybe not at the same time as we do, and they have a religious establishment, and they appear to believe in God and worship in much the same way. And I think that is something that, at least in my experience in the Delta, The fact that you have your own beliefs and are sincere about them are respected by most people.
While anti-Semitism played little or no part in the daily life of Delta Jews, the fear of it, nevertheless, lurked somewhere beneath the surface. In the South, as in every other corner of the Jewish diaspora, Jews understood that it was not periods of prosperity and calm they had to be wary of, but times of turmoil. As the events of the 1950s and 60s turned Mississippi into a battleground in the struggle for civil rights, local Jews could not help but be reminded that social upheaval had a way of unleashing hidden resentments and prejudice. The U.S. Supreme Court's 1954 decision declaring segregated schools unconstitutional sent shockwaves through the South. Southern segregationists dug in their heels and mobilized to resist.
I urge the people of Mississippi and the South to respond to this call for total mobilization. The only way we can win this fight is to defeat the enemy. To destroy the enemy before the enemy destroys us.
People talked about it as the final battle for the Southern way of life. Nobody knew where that was going, and nobody knew what forces were going to be unleashed before this thing was over. So loyalties were being tested, lines were being drawn, and security was not assured. And I believe that that's the time when Jews were most aware of their marginality, felt and were, I would argue, the most vulnerable.
Southern Jews had long avoided racial politics. Now, as battle lines were drawn, they held their breath and hoped to avoid being dragged into the fray.
By and large, the attitude of the Jewish community was, at least on the surface, not greatly different from the white community at large. Now, I know from just talking privately with people that probably because the Jews had either themselves or had family in Europe who'd been the victims of oppression, probably had more of a sympathetic feeling for the plight of black people. But there was no Jewish organization that was out in the forefront of the civil rights movement in Mississippi or anywhere else in the South that I'm aware of.
In Mississippi, organized resistance to integration was spearheaded by the White Citizens Councils, groups of local civic leaders in nearly every community who united under a banner of states' rights and racial integrity.
The White Citizens Council was truly, in my opinion, a glorified businessman's Ku Klux Klan. I mean, they didn't ride horses with hoods on. They walked down the street with a suit and tie on. Their feelings were not quite as radical, but they were pretty tough, pretty tough. I mean, they clearly did not believe in the equality of man. And they probably didn't like Jews a lot more than they liked blacks.
So that was a very tense time. It manifested itself in all sorts of ways, including incidents like local organizers of citizens' council groups walking into businesses owned by Jews and saying, essentially, are you with us or them? It was like a moment of truth. Whose side are you on? And in just those words.
And in Greenville, a major fellow in the Jewish community immediately joined. And he tried to get the synagogue basically to go along, to enlist virtually everybody in it. He said, listen, if we don't get on board, if we do not join, then of course we are going to be ourselves isolated out. and they will begin to remember that we are Jews and not Southerners, and they will act accordingly.
When my father's friends in the temple would want to drift into the world of the Citizens Council and be part of that my father didn't stand for, there was obviously some tough feelings, some heated words. I think Jews joined organizations like the Citizens Council because they thought they had to. They felt to live and to get by as Jews and citizens that they had to compromise perhaps some of their own views.
As part of their recruitment efforts, the Citizens Councils published a pamphlet written anonymously by a Delta Jew, saluting the efforts of the councils and encouraging Jewish membership.
And there was a lot of speculation among Delta Jews as to who among them might have written it. But there was also this sort of ambivalent feeling that maybe they were sort of glad whoever did it, even though the people talking about it might not have agreed with it. It was sort of taking the heat off.
There was always that sense in the Jewish community that necessarily, given the reality of white racism, that every time there was an emergence of really organized racism, that somewhere down the line Jews would be targeted simply because they always had been.
The Ku Klux Klan did not have a significant foothold in the Delta, but it was enjoying a resurgence elsewhere in the state and across the South. Because Northern Jews had long been active and outspoken in the civil rights movement, many Southern Jews feared they would be tagged as sympathizers in a case of guilt by association. A series of bombings at Southern synagogues and Jewish community centers in the late 50s only confirmed those fears and sent chills through the Southern Jewish community. In Mississippi, tensions continued to rise.
And I'll say that 9/10 of the problems we've had over the years has been by outsiders coming in here and causing problems. You know,
Our biggest problem has been outside Jews coming in.
and I'm sure they thought they were doing something worthwhile. They were doing something wonderful.
That's been our only problem.
1961 marked the beginning of a new era in the struggle for civil rights in Mississippi, as activists from the North and West arrived to join the efforts of local blacks. Mississippi's Jews were quick to note that many of the outside agitators, as they were known, were Jewish. Besides religion, there was little else they had in common.
We were never really happy when young Jewish students would come through as freedom riders. I mean, the congregation as a whole was not happy at all about that. They felt like it put the Jewish people in this community on the spot, and they were not pleased. And occasionally, some would come to temple on Friday night. And people, I can't say were really gracious.
Well, that was a bad situation down in here. These people had no business in here. That's my opinion. They had no business in here. We were getting along all right. They come down here and they're going to change this thing up just like that. And they had no business down in here. We got along with everybody.
While they could understand black people engaging in civil disobedience and the other activities that they did, it was very difficult for many Jews in the South to accept the degree of Jewish participation in that. They just felt that wasn't the Jews' fight, and the Jews ought not to be involved in it.
It was upsetting to a lot of people that this element had come into our community. They were not our kind of people, as we said. They weren't clean. They were crude. They were loud. They were not the kind of Jewish people we were used to. So had they not come for integration, we still wouldn't have had anything to do with them.
Anxiety about the presence of outside Jews was underscored as public attention focused on the disappearance and murders of two Northern Jewish activists, Mickey Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, along with a black Mississippian, James Chaney, in the summer of 1964.
Well, everybody was appalled by that. Nobody said, they had it coming. That was certainly greeted with revulsion.
As fear escalated, local Jews looked to their rabbis for leadership. A Baltimore native, Alan Schwartzman, had come to Greenville's Hebrew Union Temple in 1960.
The Jewish community was very concerned about their relationship with the non-Jewish population. They wanted the rabbi to, at least in Greenville, not to compromise his position, but not to be outwardly forthright and embarrass them in front of the non-Jewish population.
In Cleveland, Mississippi, Rabbi Moses Landau, who had immigrated from Austria in the 1930s, bristled at the idea that he should endanger his congregation by speaking out.
Look here, as a rabbi, if something happened, I can pick myself up and leave and get to other congregation. But the people on the street, they have everything invested here. The stores, the planters, the farmers, they cannot leave. You have to understand the same thing happened in Vienna. The people who had the investments could not leave right away when Nazis came into Austria. Those who had no investments could leave right away. They had all the investments there. They would come out poor. Decades and years of labor were gone. They couldn't leave right away. They didn't believe it's going to happen what happened. So a rabbi who's taking care of a community has to be very careful, has to consider his own people first.
I had to understand where Landau was coming from. After all, he was in a small town. He was a German refugee who had experienced some of this hatred in Europe, actually. But he wanted to be secure in his position, and therefore he felt that he could survive as long as he stayed clear of this issue.
The community itself knew where Jews stand, because what they read and hear on television, newspaper, and so on. But we did not put yourself out for it too much. We went along. That we did.
Frustrated by poor living conditions and lack of opportunity, blacks in the Delta joined the massive migration of Southern blacks to northern cities. In the years following World War II, the use of mechanical cotton pickers had reduced the need for farm labor. Industrialization lagged, and many blacks and whites saw little future in the Delta. With their customer base dwindling and their children leaving, Jewish merchants shut their doors and moved away. The Story of Jews in the South, the author Eli Evans wrote, is the story of fathers who built businesses for their sons who didn't want them.
The children didn't want dry goods stores and that kind of stuff. They outgrew that kind of
I mean, they became professionals. I mean,
and
the
then,
Johns said
and
they
then the
wanted-
economy here too. That you
Changed
see at
completely.
the time it changed to the point where plantations, like you had 300 families on a plantation, they might have 30 people now. There was nothing for the young people to come back to, and then they went to college and they became accountants and doctors and that kind of stuff, and there was nothing in Clarksdale for them to come back to. That's the biggest reason for the change here, in my opinion, at least that way.
Well, I think it was social, too. I mean, I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think they would have ever come back here to live. They were looking for a different type of life, a more Jewish life, a more complete life.
Good morning, Rabbi.
How are you?
Even with only 8 children, religious school still meets every Sunday morning in Cleveland, Mississippi.
Good morning, Rabbi.
How about you? You?
When one misses class, it does not escape notice.
Where's Benjamin?
Benjamin is not here.
Benjamin's not, I know he's not here.
Right. Well, I have sought to get Benjamin here, and I have failed. Benjamin
A
has
single father with 3 sons, Paul Kosman is one of a handful of parents raising Jewish children in the Mississippi Delta.
I don't know, I just kind of feel like it might be a bit easier in the big cities. Okay. I think that my children would have the benefit of numbers. Here they are so few, and they feel that they are so few. Of course, I felt that I was among so few. Maybe that will cause them to be more committed or more thinking or more considered in what they are. So many Jewish kids are not staying in the small town South, and in fact are now part of the big city experience.
When I graduate, I want to go out of state to college where there's a bigger Jewish population, so I can meet somebody Jewish and marry somebody Jewish. And I think my parents want me to do that too, because my brother went to the University of Texas and he already has a Jewish girlfriend.
I'm not going to be anywhere in Mississippi. I want to go somewhere, I mean, it's a big temple, be Jewish. Or, I mean, like, if I had kids and stuff, I'd want them to be around lots of Jewish people. And, I mean, this is fine here, you know, but, I mean,
As it was for their parents, the key to preserving Jewish life among the next generation of Southern Jews is maintaining a sense of community. For many, this Jewish summer camp in Utica, Mississippi, not far from the Delta, provides one of the rare opportunities they have to interact with other Jews their age.
All my best friends from camp. We write letters, talk on the phone, and then, I mean, it's not that I'm saying that my Christian friends don't mean as much as my Jewish friends, because, I mean, I love my non-Jewish friends just as much as my Jewish friends, but, I mean, I feel more comfortable and can express myself more around my Jewish friends.
In the years following World War II, there were as many as 1,500 Jews living in the Delta. Today, there are fewer than 300. This synagogue in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, is shutting its doors for good. The building will be sold and the chairs donated to a local church.
Well, we've known for a number of years as the Jewish population started to wither a little bit that it was just a matter of time. I sent a letter to all of our congregants, all 8 or 10 of us, and just told them that, and I'd call most everyone prior to that just to make sure there were no strong feelings not to do it. I think everyone had real mixed emotions. I really hate to see us do it. I hate for us to possibly lose our Jewish presence in the county because it's been here for generations. I don't see any new Jewish people moving into the area. I expect that I'll be here until I retire and maybe beyond, but I don't expect any of my children to live here, although one of them probably would like to come back maybe and farm one day. I don't see them coming back here and probably would not encourage them to.
I would not mind if my children came back here to live, but I would like for them to be married before they came back here to live, because I know if they came back here single to live, the chances of them marrying someone Jewish would be slim to none, because there's so few and will be fewer. But we feel that the advantages of small town and all that have outweighed the disadvantages, and it's just made us try to work harder as far as raising the children and making sure that they had a Jewish identity. So you do these things to try to really help them maintain their Jewish identity and have a link with other Jewish people, and you do have to work a little bit harder at it, but it's not impossible.
I feel like it's a mitzvah, the Hebrew word mitzvah, a good deed for me to be here on Friday night. It's often said, our sages of old teachers, that a person's life is hereafter is based on the mitzvahs. Every time I get up here, I think it's a mitzvah. Every time I act as a pallbearer, I think it's a mitzvah. I serve on the Hever Kedusha, which is a committee that prepares the dead. Every time I do that, I think it's a mitzvah. Somebody comes up and thanks me. I says, no, you don't thank me, it's a mitzvah. You don't thank somebody for doing a mitzvah.
We've got probably enough land to bury every Jew that has ever lived in Mississippi or ever will. My maternal grandfather was quite scholarly and quite devoted to Jewish affairs. My uncle Ben Sklar in Rouville tells a funny story about him. He spoke and wrote Hebrew fluently. And whenever a Jewish person died, there was no rabbi, even in Cleveland in those days, although there was later. And whenever a Jewish person died, someone had to write the Hebrew inscription for the tombstone. And my grandfather used to do that for the Jews in that area. And one day, Ben came into the store, and my grandfather was sitting there writing something in Hebrew, and he knew that it was an inscription for a tombstone because that's all he ever wrote in Hebrew. And he says, Papa, what are you writing? Who died? Because he had not heard that any Jewish person had died recently. And he says, well, I've just been thinking. He says, I do this for everybody else, and I thought, who's going to do it for me? So I'm writing my own inscription. And that inscription now appears on his tombstone here in the Greenville Jewish Cemetery.
I don't know what's going to happen with the Jewish population in the Delta, whether they'll just be an ever smaller remnant which will somehow get together for observances and social events. But there will still have been that history, and there will still be a record of it. I think it's an interesting example of the flexibility that Jews have demonstrated in lots of historical places all over the world. And we've shown a very great capacity as a people for adaptation. Jews in lots of unlikely places. And we were there too. We were in the Delta. And it may not last forever, but we were there.
Major funding for this program has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding has been provided by the Mississippi Humanities Council and others. A complete list is available from PBS.